so I'm going to set my timer for really fast. In part because I want to make sure that we have enough time for some conversation. But like I said before, now I'm up here under the guise of the activist. And in that guise, you might be asking yourself, well, so, okay, this is all really interesting, but where is the action? Where does the rubber meet the road in terms of beginning to build out these conversations, beginning to see policy change, beginning to see how these kinds of insights might affect behavior? And I want to talk about that. But before I do, I want to note that there's a kind of interesting moment that's happening for us in the experience of this project, which is, so when Marta came in to work with experimental data visualization, we thought that's amazing, that's going to be fantastic. We're very surprised, frankly, at how far the students were able to get in 12 weeks. So much so that we're actually, as she suggested, we're funding the development of that work that they're doing. But we're also finding is that she's now going to come on board and is working with a landscape architect and a sculptor in the coming year for another studio that we're going to fund, which is going to be directed at thinking about oyster habitat from the perspective of kind of sculptural interventions as a form of habitat restoration, which we want to see and imagine as public artworks that at once kind of help raise the consciousness for people in Narragansett Bay around those habitat restoration projects, but that also reorient them to the larger, well, reorient them to the bay in kind of a fundamental way. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. Probably it'll be somewhere between Kate Orff's Oyster Texture, which is on your left, which was part of the Rising Tides show at MoMA a couple of years ago, and Mara Hazeltine's Oyster Island, which is a submersible oyster habitat. Now, I know that doesn't function as activism in the sort of traditional sense, right? But I think it is instructive of ways that community arts practices can begin to have really powerful impacts. Again, the smell of them, maybe. We don't promise yet. Can begin to really move and motivate the way that people are seeing and thinking about the environment that they're living in and their relationship to it. So you'll remember when I started the conversation earlier in the first presentation, I talked about this kind of fulcrum, this imaginary fulcrum between research and activism. And I think it's a little bit, need to maybe place a few caveats there. And I can place those caveats there because of experience that I had with about 125 students in 2007 and 2008 to produce a design showcase for the Democratic National Convention called Partly Sunny. It was Partly Sunny Designs to Change the Forecast. We were a little bit more optimistic in 2008 than we would be today. But what it consisted of were 36 different design initiatives from around the world that illustrated the real mid-term and short-term benefits that individuals, communities, municipalities, and institutions were having, making investments around climate adaptation. It was also part of an incredibly much broader outreach program while we were in the city of Denver that included pledge cards that we used to actually orient student groups to the whole exhibition. So at the back of each of these cards, you'd see one of the 6 major categories. It sort of helped you walk through the exhibited materials for those 6 major categories. And we had something like 500 people make pledges about how they would change their lives. There was a lot of, I'm going to ride my longboard to school, and I'm going to shower with a friend. But there were also some pretty significant ones about, someone said they were going to invest $30,000 in installing solar on their roofs in the next 2 years. So we, in addition to that, we sort of staffed this on-site library, and we hosted what became what we called the Green Constitutional Congress to have a conversation about what the future of environmental activism could be or should be in the next administration, the one we were hoping would come. This was hosted at the Denver Opera House. It included Bruce Mau, Massive Change, the founder of Ethos Water, who was at that point the CEO of Good Magazine, Majora Carter, David Orr, DJ Spooky, and Bob, who was developing the Presidential Climate Action Project, which was a bipartisan group, and I'll come to his name probably as soon as I get off the stage, to basically provide information for all of the candidates about the kinds of climate action work they should do. Now, I say it's a cautionary tale, right? Because it was a lot of really interesting conversation over 7 days. I have no idea what happened afterwards. No idea about the impacts of any of the 700 people who came through the exhibition over the course of 5 days. No idea what the impact was of being in 120 news outlets around the world because of the work. No idea whatsoever. No longitudinal study, no anecdotal information, nada. So, it strikes me that in the context of actually thinking about work and thinking about cultural change, that education, and I say this as an educator, it wounds me to say this, education and communication can't be enough. In that context, one of the spin-offs of what we've got going from the EPSCoR grant is a proposal right now to develop a resilience strategy for the state of Rhode Island. And that's informed by another project that I got to work on a number of years ago, which I think is interesting and probably useful for us here. And that was something called the Rhode Island Wind Project. So, and I want to bring it forward because it suggests a way of integrating the kinds of technical expertise that artists and designers might bring to bear. That is to say, we were hired by the Rhode Island Renewable Energy Fund to work with towns and communities that were thinking about climate change and thinking about wind power. And we were hired basically to provide all the technical systems and simulations that they would need to actually work through, like where are the interconnects for the infrastructure? Where would they get the most energy? Where would it have to be placed? So they could basically have an idea and spend no financial or no political capital. We're basically working as a design shop, an ad hoc design shop. At the same time, we were working as kind of an ad hoc activist organization. We toured the state, gave talks every place, developed slideshows and presentations that we gave anywhere people asked. Community meetings, community meetings, community meetings, community meetings. Did I mention community meetings? That were basically just trying to provide a context so that people could have a more measured understanding of what their wind or what their energy decisions were. It's one thing to say that you don't like wind, you think it might kill some birds, some bats, what have you. Clearly, some of that happens. It's another thing to say, well, let me compare that to one of Massachusetts' Filthy 5, Brayton Point, which is helped basically decimate the flounder population at the upper end of Narragansett Bay, because that's a decision you've already made. So how do you balance those decisions? That's all we were asking. Sorry if the slide's a bit out, but what it resulted in was we helped get the first industrial turbine installed in the state of Rhode Island and contributed to a change in the renewable portfolio standard for the whole state that aimed as a target for 15% wind energy within 5 years. Now, I've been gone for a couple of weeks traveling. I got home just this last week, and there are 3 new turbines in Providence. It's just an amazing moment to me. What's amazing to me about it, though, isn't what happened here, right? Our contribution, frankly, to the RPS was minimal. But what we knew from statistical studies was that real action, that putting the first turbine in the ground was going to change the game. Because all the statistical studies indicate that approval ratings go up to about 95% the year after the turbine goes in. Action is what's necessary. Figuring out how to link effectively the creative and motivated work that we do in our studios, in our homes, in our communities, with the right kind of policy, could be game-changing. And that's not something I usually feel very confident saying, in the United States, right? Linked to policy. But still, it's clear it can be a game-changer. I think we have that opportunity as artists, as designers, working in collaboration with scientists, with policymakers, and so on. Thanks.